start with developing foundations. The thing that I hear most is, people obviously want to try to build something highly valuable and usually with some kind of a notion about what they're going to do to solve some kind of a problem. And then they want to validate it. And if you're doing all that right, then obviously you're probably onto a winner. But there are lots of challenges in that. The first thing I'm going to try to do is help you extract the most value from it. So when you start your development, you could just develop it all yourself, or you could think about how could you develop the minimum viable product, and then even less than that, only the piece that is your core value. Now, I cover core as part of my business model session, but basically, it's the notion that you literally only build what is your exceptional capability. So in Greg's case, he had this capability to, for example, create a 3D image. But displays, that wasn't a core competency, right? I mean, Texas Instruments had that core competency, and he ended up being dependent on them. That's another story. But you want to try and find out what it is that's your core piece. And John, for example, will talk about that when he comes to tell you tonight about what he's doing in his new company. Then, to develop faster, I really recommend you think about things that are changing in our world. We didn't have this when I was building products, but crowdsourcing is a great way to build products. When you go to put up your website, is that your core competency? I doubt it. Go use Odesk or Elance or whatever for your landing pages, or create some basic wireframes using people who are probably a tenth the labor cost of what's here in Massachusetts, in Estonia where I was last week. There's lots of places to do this stuff effectively. And then find ways to be just smarter in terms of how you co-create things. This is a whole section unto itself, so I want to give you at least a clue to it. The first secret I want to give you is something that I see the really good startups do over and over again. They don't build everything as though the only customer is outside the building. They immediately start thinking about how could they build on themselves. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you know you've got, for example, a multi-level product. For example, let's say you've got a design tool that is used to customize your e-commerce site. Why don't you do exactly what we've done now at Demandware? Create a platform that your internal engineers actually use to build your product on. Why? Because immediately you're creating a customer relationship, even though it's an internal customer for your product. You're forcing yourself to see whether your internal engineers can actually use your platform and whether that platform actually is going to work when you now expose it later on to the outside world. It's such an obvious thing to do, yet I see very few companies do it. The good ones make this really quickly a part of their culture so that they're always thinking about how do we serve the customer? How can our platform be more open, more extensible, etc.? So be your own customer. And then on this open extensible thing, if you've got a core that's really tight, think Linux and all the various different pieces that have got built around it, then make it open and extensible so other people can do things like add drivers to it, which would have been wonderful if we could have taken Greg back and said, hey, Greg, what if you'd been able to do this OpenGL thing from day one? Would that have made a difference?
Yeah, would help.
Yeah. I mean, he right away, once he got that, was able to interface with other products that had this standard. And he said something very important there, which is he also made open APIs, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. And then, we have a world which is full of communities now building open source. Literally millions of lines of code that's available to you free. Why not access it? Don't build everything. If you can avoid building it and just use other people's developments, then leverage that. The largest community in the world of open source happens to be a company I'm lucky enough to back called Acquia, building on Drupal. There are over 1,000 people who contributed to building Drupal 7. It's the largest open source community in the world. And there is no way that Drupal would be as successful as it is if it wasn't open source, because nobody could possibly develop all the features and functionality that's required to move at the pace of the web, to do everything from integrate with Facebook at one extreme to PayPal at the other extreme, and in between with CRM systems. So this is something that's very fundamental. So before you jump into building your product, think about how could you build it effectively and very efficiently with all those kinds of ideas. Smarter, faster, better, cheaper, effectively.